Good evening, and welcome to the February 19th meeting of the Tyngsborough Capital Asset Management Committee. I am the chair of this committee, Ron Schneider. The following meeting is being recorded and broadcast by Tyngsborough Media. The meeting is available on our local cable access channels on Comcast and Verizon Fios, and as a live stream on our website, www.tyngsboroughma.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available through the video on demand portion of our website. Open meeting laws require that any member of the audience who intends on recording either video or audio declare that now. Seeing none, I will now start the meeting with introductions to my right.
Anthony Tinarella, School Committee?
All the way to the right.
On your right.
Okay.
Good evening, Catherine Foster, Assistant Town Manager.
You already know who I am.
Good evening, Eric Eldridge, Select Board.
Earl Mason, Finance Committee.
Thank you very much. All right. First item is to approve meeting minutes from the January 22nd, 2025 meeting.
So moved.
Do I have a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? That carries 4-0-0. Next item is the FY 26 to 30 capital funding plan update. Kat, do you want to take that? Oh, you've got the spreadsheet.
Oh, I got the spreadsheet up.
It's up.
So thinking about this sort of on the fly, I don't know if we want to actually start with item number 4. I think I'll explain why I say that.
Okay.
Before you this evening is the 5-year capital plan, which includes most of the requests that we received this year from departments. The town manager and myself, we took out about 5 or 6 of them that we felt that we could put into the operating budget. So here is the plan that we have at this moment, that including the ones that we took out and everything else, including what the school department included. So what I would like to do is to go through this and see if we have any questions, because it is our intent to, at the next meeting, which we hope to schedule in March, vote on a true 5-year capital plan. So using this to inform also a borrowing plan for us, which we'll be working on in the next couple weeks as well. So
Can I ask a question before we do that, Mr. Chair?
Yes, but of course.
So that I'm prepared. Is our intent to say, all right, these are the projects over the next 5 years, or is it to get an idea of approximately how much we're going to have in capital each year? Because there's things that we know, and then there's things that come about. Because, I mean, like the backhoe wasn't on there
Right.
a couple years ago, or even last year. So I'm just trying to get a feel. I know that it's going to be real hard to look out 5 years and say, yeah, I definitely need to have that particular item 5 years from now. But for planning purposes, I assume from a borrowing standpoint, you're going to want to know, okay, I'd like to somewhat level it off, and this is about what we think we're going to need for capital each year over the next 5, give or take, because something might be added, something might be taken off.
But I think they're, to a certain extent, part of the same thing, right? I mean, I think our borrowing plan and our capital plan, we're talking the same thing. We don't have perfect crystal clarity about anything more than a year out.
Yep.
But at least we have a strategy or a process to look at them. So we're not just looking at 1 year and then, no, we didn't fund it this year, we'll kick it into next year, So something a little bit more long-term than that. But no, I appreciate what you're saying. But I think we're up to the realization that the capital plan and the borrowing plan are going to be tightly meshed going forward, because there's just going to be a limit on free cash going forward, right? So part of it is understanding that limit now and making sure that we have borrowing capacity to do that, and also that we're addressing via all the departments, all the areas of the town, what are the capital items that we're looking at. I don't know if that answers your question anyway.
I think so. I mean, I think, like I said, I think the challenge, I don't know what the school did, I don't know what the departments did, right? I know that a lot of times what they're doing is they're trying to look out 5 years and say, you know what, I got a roof, or I got a big item that's coming, and that one's kind of like 4 or 5 years out. But there's some that you sit there and go, you know what, I've got visibility, I can give you 2-3 years max on some of these things, just because there's some stuff that's known, and then there's a bunch of stuff that's just like, I don't know. I just want to, I'm trying to figure out how hard I want to scrutinize these things, but I think your ask is, you know what, get an idea what some of these things are, make sure that they should be capital items, number one, and then to say, okay, orders of magnitude, this is what we're talking about. If one comes in a year or goes out a year and we have to shuffle some,
That's
no
fine.
big deal.
Yeah, right.
Yes, that's exactly what we're looking for
Got
tonight.
it. I just want to make sure, before you started going through them, that way I won't get into the details.
But, right, this is not meant to be that prescriptive. I think this is more a high-level, call it a template or a strategy, but we all know that these things are gonna move from year to year. But we wanna plan for as many of them as we can, right?
But fiscal '26 is fiscal '26, that you kind of hone in on more accuracy on '26, right?
We would hope,
Right, that's
yeah.
right here and now, right?
If we can't do that, then we have no hope 5 years from now.
Well, '26 is it's a long ways away, right, still? I look at that, you know?
It's true.
And then, if I could add to that.
Yes.
Chair. We look at these items that we're projecting. I'm gonna go back to Pierce Field like I do at almost every meeting, where we know that in 8 to 10 years from now, we're gonna need $1.6 million for Pierce Field replacement, if that's what we choose to do at the time. Where do those things fall in this 5-year plan? And I use Pierce Field as an example, but because, let's face it, at town meetings, everybody was crying, what did you do to prepare for this? We knew it was coming. So that's just
Right.
an easy one to use as an
Well-
example. But we'll have others like that,
Yes,
that is gonna be a $1.6 million hit 10 years from now.
understood. No, good,
None
it's
of
a
us
good
will be
point.
here, but
I hope.
at least I hope.
What?
In this chair, I hope. I plan on being on a beach in Florida. But we don't put anything in this particular capital plan to save for those events. Now, I know we do have the capital asset stabilization fund,
Yeah,
but do we put enough in that each year to account for these things coming down? A new fire truck, new police cars, which are on this, but I think there should be a line item each year on this capital asset plan for future capital assets. Maybe not borrowed, but at least money put aside through free cash or what have you. And the capital asset stabilization fund, I know, kind of does that, but do we put enough in there to cover those types of expenses further down?
I mean, I think the short answer is, no, we never put enough away, right?
Right.
And that's why we're always doing this dance of, you know, what are our priorities, which ones can we afford, which ones can we not afford? Although Pierce Field is a unique example, because I'm guessing ostensibly some of the CPC money could be devoted to that, maybe not, I don't know. I know that recreation is one of the categories, right?
I think the building portion of it, the
But not the
original
maintenance?
setup, but I think replacing the turf
Yeah.
is more maintenance.
Really?
Yeah.
That's not considered a new project? I don't know.
I don't believe so. I think we tried.
Okay. No, then you're absolutely right. We need to, in addition to the items that we have, and some of them are bigger than others, if we know that on the horizon there's a massive item coming, we'd be remiss not to put it on the list somewhere. And if it's 10 years out, maybe it doesn't belong in this list, but certainly we have to acknowledge that that exists out there, right?
We need to start saving for it.
Yeah,
today.
yeah.
Or 3 years ago when we put the field in, we talked about creating some sort of saving mechanism for those types of things, but we never seem to incorporate them in our conversations, but I'd like to see that.
We have, I think I agree with you totally, right? You sit there and go, we put money away. Is it enough? No. So I think, and that's kind of why we're doing this, is so that we can plan each year to have some sort of a thing to sit there, because it's not just capital stabilization, right? We sit there, we've got other stabilizations that that we're trying to build up, and we need to be conscious of those so that they can set forth a budget that takes those into account. The hard part that we have is there's gonna be some of those year, one-off situations in certain years, and you sit there and go, I don't have it. And so you might not be able to put some of that in there. I think it's gonna be incumbent upon us to say, for those years where we do have it, we need to hold fast to that, putting some in. And it might be that we sit there and say, for the years that we don't put money into capital stabilization, to sit there and say, okay, next year we gotta get double what we weren't gonna, if we say we need 200 a year, if we don't put 200 this year, we need to map out, it's kind of like paying yourself back
Yeah,
in your rainy day fund.
right.
And I think that's what we've been trying to do with the stabilization accounts. Most recently, in the last few years, we've been able to do that.
Yep.
Just not to the level we'd
No,
like.
and it all comes back to, very tight fiscal responsibility in the way we budget and the way we plan. Because it's very easy to say, okay, we got a balanced budget, but we'll put that off. We'll put this stabilization off, we'll put that stabilization fund off. So it does require an additional level of discipline that to say we need to do that. And that's just as important as the current year bills, right? We've got to figure out a way to be able to manage the budget and put our money away for the stabilizations and our rainy days and whatever, because those rainy days come, every year. So I think we're all saying the same thing, but I'm glad you acknowledged it and brought it up. Thank you. Okay, so we've settled all that. That was easy.
So given that conversation, I don't know if we want to start with just refining, we talked about at our last meeting, figuring out what kind of guidance we want to give departments in terms of what a capital item is. And I want to turn back to the bylaw just real quickly if I can get it.
That's exactly what I did. Let's go back to see what the bylaw says.
So with that here, this lens here, looking at it, is a capital item, is it being purchased or undertaken at intervals of not less than 5 years, has a useful life at least 5 years, and cost at least $25,000 unless the department is able to show that the request is a one-time unexpected expense that cannot be accommodated within its operating budget. And I believe this is what Mr. Tenorella said when we were referring to this was included at a later, or more recently, because of some departments or some.
It was the cemetery.
Yes, sorry, excuse me.
Department with the fence.
Yes, well, now a department at that time,
Yes.
a commission, or,
Yes.
so did not have a budget. And that still exists for some of our committees, so I think that that's still appropriate. So that being said, unless we want to change that, I think using that to look at the requests as well. So anyway, that being said, I'm happy to go through the fiscal year here and see if you have any questions, you want to take anything out. I think that would be the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I think so.
So everything in FY26 here is funded. The only thing that we're keeping here, so we can have a discussion on, is the MacBooks. I believe 50 of them were already funded through a change order through the middle school project. I think that leaves us with, that was about like half of the request, a little more for FY26. I think it was 90 each year. Is this something that we want to include, just guidance moving forward? I mean, that will be adjusted slightly, obviously, to whatever the cost per laptop is, but.
Well, I think we talked about kind of milking it in over a couple of years to get it into our budget, but it's a big hit.
Does that fall into capital versus an expense? Because, you know,
Does it?
it's an item of a couple $1,000s, right? You know, we deal with that in our business world, right?
Yes.
Buy 10 of them or 20 of them, it's 40 grand, oh, it's capital. If I just bought 2 or 3 as an expense, but the individual item's probably 2 grand, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
So back probably 10 years ago, I think, we put it into capital asset because it was such a huge expense.
Yep.
Moving it back is fine, but we got to do it gradually
Can't do it overnight.
overnight, yeah.
Yep.
A $200,000 hit to the budget would be pretty big.
yeah. No, I was thinking the same thing you were thinking, Earl, because individually, they're expense items.
Right.
By virtue of the fact that you lump them together, does it turn it into a capital item, or is it just an expense item?
Yep.
I mean, you know, our bylaws would say that would not fall under a capital item, each individual laptop. But because, to your point, it's such a big nut to absorb in the budget, by default, we're throwing it in here, but is this the proper place? to
Has the
put that?
bylaw always been 25, or has that been recently changed?
No, it was
We bumped
50.
that.
It was 50, and you bumped it down to 25.
We bumped it down, yeah.
Okay. So even when it was 50, you capitalized PCs before? Or no, you
Not
expense them in the operating?
We did it in the capital asset management process. We kind of were a little bit loose in how we followed the bylaw, which is why
Yes.
we tightened it. We said, look,
Got it.
25 is a better number. I do think, I mean, computers, they don't last for 5 years.
Right.
Technically, right? So they're not in there. I think on a long-term basis, I think they should be expensed and part of the budget.
Absolutely, agreed.
But what we need to do is we need to figure out, okay, how do we phase that in so that it can be absorbed within the budget without having a big hit?
Yep.
This year, we're gonna do it as part of the middle school project, but we gotta figure out, okay, what about the rest of it?
Correct.
And the question is, I mean, I don't think we have the money from a capital standpoint. I don't think we have the money based on the budget stuff that I've seen. Because we're not gonna be putting a bunch into stabilization, we're not gonna be putting a bunch of stuff. I think we're gonna be in a better position next year for those things, because, I mean, between health insurance and some one-time charges, this year is not a good year for that.
Challenging.
But, so I don't know what the impact would be if we said, okay, put it in 50 of them in the middle school, what if we don't do any more this year? I don't know what the impact is to the school.
Well, is that 102 getting funded out of another source when you say it's funded from the middle school project?
Well, that's only 50 out of the request.
Like 90 or so.
I got it.
Out of the new building.
Yeah,
technology
but, so now we're then focusing on the 107 in 2027, is that what we're thinking now, or?
So it would be probably, if I'm correct, it was a total of 90. I apologize, I had to look back. So this would only be half of the request. And I believe in discussions with the school department, the goal would be to still, I think they would be okay for this year, but it would be to still, they would need the funding for the next couple of years. I think one concern I have is that if we're replacing them all at once, we're gonna run in, the school department is gonna run into the same situation in 2 or 3 years. So wondering if we can work with the school department to create more of a phased plan, recognizing that maybe this won't be a future item. But if we're buying them all at once, they're all gonna,
They're all gonna be obsolete.
Well, can you
Right.
spread that 107 between fiscal 27 and 28 and put a piece of it in capital, a piece of it in operating? So say it's 50/50 in the 2 years, and maybe it's 25K comes out of operating in 27, maybe something like that, to split it up that way, and so it's not the big hit to the operating?
I'd have to have that conversation with Dr. Flanagan
Yeah, absolutely.
and Mr. Messina.
and if I'm correct, these were all laptops that were purchased when we went to remote learning during the pandemic.
Yes.
So they were purchased with ARPA
For the
and
ARPA
all
funds, yes.
reached their end of life.
End of life, right. So now they have to be, so if you look at it, it looks like this year's request would have been approximately 200,000. 100,000 of that is going through the middle school project.
I think we haven't updated those numbers,
Oh, okay.
so this was actually the original request, so whatever, it would be reduced by,
So right now,
let's just
this
say
year's,
50.
yeah, this year's is down to 50 or 46, if we're doing that math. 40 remaining. So yes. But I'd also have to get the total count of the MacBooks that we're actually purchasing school-wide.
Right.
Yes.
You know, in all 3 buildings, and so this could be a phase, 90 is not a lot of computers, so I'll have to get the numbers for each.
Do they need to be replaced because there's issues or software compatibility issues as time? I know things get outdated,
Yeah,
but
so
lots of
it's
folks have
outdated.
computers that are 5 years, 6 years, that are still functioning fine, right?
You have 10, 11, 12-year-olds working on them too. So
Yep.
that adds to it.
So some may last a year and have a problem, but others could go
Right.
5 years, 6 years maybe.
Yes.
Okay.
But my guess is they typically buy these with a 3-year warranty,
Correct.
because that's all you can get.
Yep.
At the end of that 3 years, I got a 10 or 11-year-old who's working on it. Oh, it broke, and it's not under warranty, I gotta replace it.
Okay.
So there are times when you can get 4 and 5 years out of them. You can't plan for that.
Okay.
I think from a planning standpoint, both from a fiscal planning standpoint, you'd want to smooth that out across all of the
Oh, absolutely.
devices. From an operational standpoint, having, I got to do 1,100 machines. We used to do them, all right, each summer you're going to do a bunch, and you sit there and go, that's stupid. So you smooth it out across every month, and you try to do that. We got to get to that point, though, and figure out from a
Correct.
monetary standpoint, how do we
do
how
that?
do we do that? And I
I'm
guess
sure Mr. Piper's all over this as well. He can tell
Yeah.
us exactly
Yeah.
what the plan is, so
But I
I can
think-
get more information on that.
Yep.
I think if we're good this year, right, if we can get by this year, because like I said, this year is a tough one to add what we've already put in for capital for this year, and sit there and say, we got to figure out how we smooth this, and
Yep.
is it a combination of operational money and capital asset money? We got to figure out how we do that to smooth it out.
And I guess the one question is then, to your point, what is a reasonable useful life for a laptop? Is it 3 years, is it 4 years?
Yep.
5 years is probably stretching it.
Probably
right?
stretching,
5
yep.
years, your borrowed time. But if it's 4 years, then ideally we get to a point where we're replacing a quarter of them each year, once we're sort of up to the level where we need to be. But I guess, so that's the question, is what is a reasonable useful life on those things?
Right.
And,
I know we used to do 3 years. We've been going to 3.5. That's what we plan for, 3.5 years. That's in a corporate setting.
yes,
An academic setting might be a little bit different. You might be able to get to 4 or whatever, but we should find out from your operational folks, what is a realistic timeline?
Yep.
And it could be that, you know what, the standard is a 3-year warranty. Does the state in our procurement process allow for a 4-year warranty on some of these things so that we can get to that 4th year, and if something happens, we're at least covered? I don't know the answers to any of these, but I sit there and say, those are the types of things. I don't think I wouldn't, if it were me and my child had to go back into school again, I wouldn't want them trying to use something that was 5 years old. But 4 years, you sit there and go, okay, and maybe we can plan for that. I just don't know what the implications are to the school department relative to
And is the use of these machines both students, administration, teacher, everybody, or are we just
No,
talking student use?
These are
only?
just teachers.
These are just
These are
teachers?
just teachers.
Teachers, these are teachers?
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
for
there's
those
already,
items.
for these items, correct.
Okay, so a student is not using it, a teacher's using it
Not
only.
this one.
Not this line item we're talking about?
Both for FY '26, FY '27, both requests are for teacher MacBook.
For
Okay.
teacher MacBooks.
Yes.
Okay, so I don't have the 10-year, 11-year-old banging on this one that we're talking about.
Do they
so,
use Chromebooks?
Okay.
They use Chromebooks,
Okay.
the students. That was my fault. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So, we'll just highlight that. Okay.
Did we answer the question?
I think we pose a lot more questions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For
We did.
Mr. Tenerelli.
But I mean, I agree. We have to sit there and say, long-term, I think the guidance is gonna be, we wanna have these in the operational budget,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep.
But how do we get there? Because doing it, cold turkey, so to speak, probably is not feasible.
And what's a reasonable number to start with? Could you start in 27? I don't know, 5K, 10K, 20, what's that number you start with to start spreading? I don't know what the room in the budget is for that, right? But what's a reasonable number?
And we can work offline to
Yeah.
figure that out.
With Mr. Piper, Mr. Messina, and Mr. Flanagan.
That's great. So go through FY '27. I'm happy to go through each individually, or if you want to have just any of the ones you have questions on. I'll,
For those of us with bad eyes,
Yeah.
could you read us what they are?
absolutely, I know it is. Yeah, as I commented how I had LASIK and I can't see it.
Otherwise, I'm gonna go stand over there, I don't know.
Nope, that's perfect. All right. So for FY '27, we have a tank one replacement for $450,000. We believe that is a true capital item. Fire
Given
department,
what I know on that item, on the first item, when we talked about the pump replacement, right, I heard that, hey, it might be a year lead time, year and a half lead time. So it's fiscal '27, but are we gonna wake up at the beginning of fiscal '27 and say, yep, we wanna do it, and I'm not gonna get it till fiscal '28? How does that, I mean, just something that we have to consider, I guess, right? Is that a need where you place the order and commit to the funds and you don't get delivered '28, or was it intended to have a use in '27? Something to ask, I don't know, right? We were able to get that demo one pretty quick, though, I think in the other one, right? We got
The
that,
pumper, yes.
so maybe it's the same process and not an issue, but someone should consider that.
it would be a similar process. I think we've always tried to find the best and most affordable
Okay,
option without sacrificing safety. And so I think it would probably be the intent to look for a demo truck.
shorter
However,
delivery time that way,
right.
okay.
But I think it would be a timing thing. I think it'd be a matter of did we get quotes for a tank that was significantly more than what we're budgeting here? I mean, recognizing that it might be a little bit, maybe more than 450,000 at this time. However, if the demo is the best and most affordable option, we can get it the soonest. I think that would be so it's more of a, once we get there, we'll be able to have a better
Okay.
understanding, just because there's so many different factors. But nope, it's a great question,
Fair
as
enough.
we're still waiting for a dump truck that,
Yeah, I've
Not
heard
a
that,
public
I've heard that
safety.
story, right, yeah,
yeah.
The town meeting also has to approve the funding for it.
right.
So we can't order it a year in advance of
Yeah.
the funding approval, so I guess that's part of the problem as well.
Right, so it could be another situation where we come to a fall town meeting, but hopefully, we'll have a good pulse on the like, as far as I know, there's not any major issues with that, so in terms of
Okay.
its, how many more years we can get out of it,
goes to
it's a great
28 probably
question.
now, right, yeah,
Right.
okay.
Knock on wood,
Okay.
nothing, nothing happens. The next one would be the Station 3 generator for $35,000. Then another FY '27 request for the IT department would be a police department server upgrade for $70,000. Another IT request for a police department network rewire. For the police department for FY '27, $185,000 for siding replacement, as well as approximately $40,500 for additional flooring. We already funded $30,000 in the FY '25 budget for flooring. This would be to finish the project, so it would just be essentially the first floor. I'm sorry, the first floor is what we're working on right now. It would be the second floor. Another police department request for $81,500, and this would be for fire alarm and devices in the building, as well as a request for approximately $85,000 for the communication center upgrade. Right, moving down to Public Works, a wheeled loader replacement for $283,000. And here we'll work on figuring out the MacBook replacements. And then the Public Schools Facilities Department requested $65,000 for a vehicle replacement. And
What was that vehicle?
it was a truck.
Is that like what they used to plow, or what is?
I don't know the answer. I apologize, but I don't.
No worries.
I think it's their just general pickup truck that their intent is to use that for that purpose.
Yeah, I know they do their own, you can't rely on the town because
Right.
certain things have to get done. I just wasn't sure whether it was one of those, because those are gonna probably take a little bit more of a beating, you know.
Oh,
If you're plowing and all that stuff, it's not like you're just driving around the town hanging out, they take a beating. Okay.
Yeah, the current one, I think, is like a significant amount of rust and mechanical issues, but they've been able to keep it running.
Makes sense.
All right, so moving to FY '28. Fire department is requesting breathing air compressors for 90,000. And then 75,000 for the scuba air packs, or SCBA.
Yep.
That stands for.
Self-contained
Forget.
breathing.
Thank
But
you.
it's just not underwater.
Could I stop at that one?
Yep.
I know we talked about this before, and putting that back into the operating budget because it's a 10-year replacement process, and I know we bought a bunch of them with ARPA.
Yep.
Also.
Yeah, I don't remember, was it 10 years on those?
I think it was a 10-year
Okay.
replacement, because we also looked at
Right.
The guns for the police department, we looked at there was a group of things that we discussed, and anything that was on a annual replacement kind of thing that we tried to get back into the,
Yeah, my understanding, and I think we should just put this as an item to check back on, because you're right, but if I remember correctly, the SCBA's, they replace them in, because there's one set, and then they do another set. But they can't buy like 3 a year, because what happens is, this set has to be the exact same model for all of them, because they have to maybe share or do something, you know, in the event of a
Correct,
thing.
yes.
So
Yeah.
I think we just have to figure out, do they have to come in groups of, was it 12 or something? I forget what we did, but there was a group that they had to come in, and is that still the case? And if so, what's the best way to do that? I think the challenge we have, correct me if I'm wrong, Kat, but operational budgets for things, like, they can't just squirrel that away and say, all right, roll that over to next year, because the unused funds have to go back in the general fund. So we would have to plan for that in a stabilization for them to do that.
but that's, yeah, and that's another one of those items
Right.
that we know this is coming.
Yeah. Should we be thinking, I mean, it's an interesting point, but should we be thinking about stabilization monies for, you know, like 75 grand? I can see the 1.6 million and saying, we need stabilization for that one. The 75 grand, I sit there and go, I don't know, there's probably a bunch of $75,000 ones that are gonna come every year that we just kinda, you know, we know when to plan for them, but maybe we don't have to put money in stabilization for that, I don't know. That's a question, more.
Right.
more
Or
than
do
any-
we look at the 10-year plan that these are, we'll just say 10 years, but 10-year plan, 75,000, 10 bottles. We put away $7,500 a year into that stabilization fund earmarked for this replacement, or something close,
Yeah,
something
but we
similar
can't
to-
earmark it. That was the other question that we'd had for capital stabilization. What happens, it just goes into well, actually, I think we could, but we'd have a separate stabilization, is my understanding.
Right.
That it goes into that, but it could be used for any capital that town meeting decides. It was the earmarking thing, because I know we were looking at, there's a
Yeah.
couple of things that we were sitting there saying, But I think that the net on it is, we need to make sure that we've got enough happening in the stabilization so that we can cover those things and to plan for them.
We can talk about that at the next meeting. Have a discussion with the fire chief about replacement frequency on those and best practices.
But it's, we go back to the MacBooks. If you bought them one at a time, it's not a capital asset.
Right.
Buy 10 of them, it is.
Yeah, my understanding is these were like $6,000 as well, and they're 10 10-year items.
Yeah.
That's-
Yeah.
Circle back on that. Okay, and then another request for the police department for CAD and RMS upgrade for $333,796. Another request from the police department for the mobile data terminals.
Because those are such so precise numbers, I assume there's a quote behind it, but it's probably current day pricing, right? Someone said today, they're not looking out what it's gonna be in 3 years. So it's a directional number, but it's going to be more, okay.
Knowing that, I
Or
will.
how many of the, that probably falls into that same category, right? How long do they last and what do they cost each?
Yeah.
Right? Do they have to be done all at the same time? Or is it, is it something where you swap out one a year? I don't know. I imagine, because we lease the vehicles, that we're doing,
You
at
did
that
match 'em up?
time, that's that year's model for whatever that thing is. Maybe not, I don't know.
There might be I believe that there's a compatibility issue with those. That's another one we can circle back on and get more information. Okay. Okay. Let's see, okay, another Public Works request for 28 for 260,000, and that is another 6-wheel dump truck.
The other one might show up by then.
Hopefully. And then we have a request from the Tyngsborough Public Schools Facility Departments, and that is for water heaters. And then we have a request for 96,000, and this would be a grounds tractor at the elementary school. And this one, we hope to have discussions with the school department about if we can maybe do a joint purchase on this and see if we can also use it for town purposes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like a discussion that we'll have then. And same with the camera system. We would be looking to also replace cameras at the PD and DPW. Maybe look at the same time because of cost savings that we might experience from bulk purchasing. However, it would be clear that there'd be separate systems. We would not have access to the school's cameras. But just an opportunity for the future to think about. And we did not discuss that with the school department yet, to be clear. Any
Do we
questions?
have, I'm always worried about cameras in the schools and all that stuff, because that's a big safety item. But it can wait. Those are one of those things, just kind of, it's probably reaching the end of life at that point, and that's when we need to.
Yes, it is.
And I'll ask separately to the public safety folks to determine what access do they have to those cameras, because I would hope the police would have the ability to tap into the school cameras at some point to better respond, but I don't want to know how it works right now.
Yeah.
We
In
could
a
really
public
put that,
meeting, I
yeah.
don't want to know.
Ignorance is bliss. All right, any more questions on FY '28?
Nope.
Okay, it's FY '29. A request from the fire department for a forestry truck. And we have a request from the IT departments for 65,000, and that would be the town hall server replacement, which will be reaching its end of life then. The police department is requesting 111,000 roughly for a portable radio replacement. In addition, they'd be looking at 52,000 approximately for PD body worn cameras. And then, as well as armory updates. This is one of those things that we also are gonna look at funding as part of the operating budget and spread that out around over 3 years, but we need to have more robust conversation with the police department to see what that looks like, if there's a benefit to purchasing them all at once. So we'll need more clarity around that one.
Yep.
I think that falls in the same
body cameras, is this a new program or is this a replacement of existing?
This would be a new program. I believe it's being required.
But if I can just add to that, I'm sorry.
Please.
But that will become a replacement item going forward.
I agree.
Yeah, and the way it is currently, and I don't know whether it'll be that way in 4 years, but there's lots of grant opportunities for the initial pieces, so my understanding is that whole thing is pretty complicated, because it's not just the cameras, it's the system on the back end to store everything, and all, there's a whole slew of things that are there. I know that we're trying to not be the guinea pig on that, so hopefully that will be one of those items that you sit there and go, it's fine-tuned by other folks, and we can tap into that, but I do hope that there's still grants available.
Okay, so moving to the Tyngsborough Public Schools facilities, a request for fencing and gates for playgrounds. That's 66,000. 192,000 is a request for elevator controller replacement upgrade. 50,000 for a rear driveway pavement preservation. I'm gonna also make a comment on the next couple, but I'll just say them first. 60,000 for the TES pavement preservation P-lot. And I'm just gonna quickly move to 30 because it's within the same, they're very similar projects, and I hope we lump them all together. So 285,000 was requested in FY 30 for TES front driveway pavement preservation. So I have a note here that we're gonna look to include this as part of our future roads program. It makes sense if we're gonna be doing work, just to lump that in, so that's our goal. So I thought I'd just point that out,
Good.
jumping ahead a little bit.
Makes sense.
Okay. Any questions on FY 29? Okay.
No, I mean, I guess the only, and when we get closer to it, but I assume like the playground fences, is that CPC eligible, right?
Correct, yeah.
You know, just some of these things, you sit there, and go, okay, well, we look at a variety, so we'll look at grants, we'll look at CPC, a variety of funding mechanisms, with the borrowing being last, right?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Always borrowing being less.
Okay. It's FY 30, we have a request from the fire department for a ladder 1 replacement for $1.1 million. And that is as today's numbers. Okay, and we have a request from the police department for $125,000 for building fire suppression. And roughly 35,000 for building heat pump replacements.
And I think that's kind of the tail end of the LaValle Brenzinger study, to say, okay, let's map all this stuff out. This is about, because we asked them to, all right, how are we gonna spread this out so it's manageable?
Yes. So on that note, all the requests in the police department for interior, exterior upgrades are all from that report, which I will circulate around because I promised to do that and I did not. Okay. And they're all phased out based off of the priority identified in that report. I don't believe I said this already, so the Tyngsborough Public Schools, the facility department has requested a gymnasium refurbishment. And then we're looking, I already mentioned that, the 285,000, which would be for the pavement preservation. And that is FY 30.
You know, if you were staying with our same methodology here, you'd have a placeholder in 29 to 30 for another 200,000 of laptops too, right? Just because it's 3 years out, right? There's nothing there now, and I hope we're going to try to solve that problem, but there would be a placeholder. We have to deal with that in 29 or 30 as well. That's not on there, just as an FYI. But good summary.
Any additional questions? Besides the information you've already requested, is there anything else that you'd like to see that may not be on there?
I'm sure there will be stuff that gets added to that, because especially looking out 5 years, it's like, oof, it's tough. The departments do a good job of trying to map those things out, but
You don't know what you don't know.
it's, I mean,
I think we could almost do an entirely separate meeting just on replacements. How do we handle, because we know what most of them are
right,
over the last 5 years, and then
Right.
looking forward to the next 5. I think we have a pretty good idea of what our replacement items are. And I'd be curious if I could ask, what were the 5 things we removed?
We removed, and this is all, this plan is based off of mapping out in discussions with myself, town manager, and finance director, how we think we can make this work. Initially, for scrub, this is how the request came in. So the Commission on Disability asked for handicap accessible doors in the veterans and the children's library room entrance. So we removed those, and we were funding those out of the operating budget. The backup and recovery solutions, security system upgrade. The 128, this was for the egress safety and security project, which was 5 or 6 doors. It was the concrete stairs going towards the field in the back of the high school.
Yep.
The canopy there, and then there was additional, I think it was like a security feature on the door. So this was all lumped into that one. And let's see. Oops.
but we didn't pull them, we just said that we were gonna fund them through operating this year.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
This building emergency lighting, the electrical panel replacement, the special services vehicle replacement, those are things we'll be funding as part of their vehicle replacement. I believe that's it, but I'm happy to send this to you for.
Yeah, please.
That's why we also added that little caveat at the end about the 6,000 for the door, the 17,000. Those wouldn't be covered under a capital asset
Right.
if we didn't put that little caveat there at the end.
Right.
But But yeah,
No, I think your point's well taken. We could have a separate meeting, just talk about replacement items. And how many of those have to be bought all at once in bulk, and how many can be spread over? Because I keep hearing compatibility issues, which sort of forces you to have to buy them in a big bulk item versus I can buy a third of them each year for the next 3 years, or a quarter for the next 4 years. And that's what sort of ties our hands sometimes, right? Is you'd love to be able to spread that out, but is that realistic, and is it self-defeating?
Yep.
But I think that warrants a separate discussion.
and I think we also need to look at how much we're putting back into the operating budget if we're not willing to increase the percentages that we're giving each department. I'll throw out the 2.7, but
Yep.
we can't just keep adding things back into the operating budgets knowing that salaries are going up, insurance is going up, costs are going up, and now so I think we have to be cautious of what we do there as well. So,
Yep.
or at least be willing to fund it in the operating budget.
That's the key, is say, well, okay, we gotta do it in the operating budget, but what are the pieces? Because we're moving stuff around, like the,
Right.
each one, we still have to work under unfortunately, whether it's capital or operating, we still have to work under Prop 2.5.
Yeah.
That's one thing they won't let us change unless we can do it over.
Borrowing versus
Right,
putting it in your operating budget is a big difference
yep.
Yep.
on some of these items, so.
So that does, that sounds like some of the stuff to talk about the criteria, what sort of things, because you guys just listed off a few key items that I would sit there and say, we'd like to know what can be bought in a spread out manner, right? Which ones, and it could be that you can do anything if you want to spread it out, but it might not be because you lose any bulk ordering discounts, or for whatever reason, it might not make sense to do it that way. So we'd like to understand some of those,
Yeah.
right? We'd like to sit there and say, okay, how many of these things can be fit? You know, I looked at some of the other criteria is, we put that last stipulation to say if it couldn't be fit in the operating budget to cover the small departments. Why can't we say, these are the departments that we're talking about? Because DPW has a big enough budget, police, fire, school, admin. It's the others that don't have that. Maybe we could just sit there and say, you know what, for you, you guys need to figure out for those types of things that aren't longer than 5 years, you know, those, like, even the server replacements, right? It's a $70,000 item, but it's every 5 years. That's 5 years. Okay, maybe we say that's big enough that we want to put it on here because the IT budget is not big enough to handle that, but it should be on there every 5 years because we know it's only going to last 5 years. But
Or do we come up with a stabilization mechanism that we can accrue for that over the course of the 5 years, because we know it's coming? And there's a lot of that I think we could be doing, it's just, how do we do it? And where does that money come from? Because
Yeah,
we're either
that's-
gonna eat it in 1 year, where we're gonna have to borrow and pay interest on it, or we're gonna eat it in smaller chunks over the course of the 5-year replacement on the server. So, and we know that tasers are coming back. We just bought a bunch of those. ARPA really helped us out with a lot of this stuff, but, you know, when we look at the police department, tasers, guns, body cams are gonna be another one. When you look at the schools, we know Piercefield's gonna need a replacement. There's other things. Vehicles and things like that are a little harder to judge, but these things that are actually have an actual shelf life, I think we need to come up with an annual saving mechanism of some sort to account for those funds.
yeah, and I'd go one step further, right? Don't we really need to say, look, this is how much we need to fund each year in capital, right? Capital items, whatever it is, right? We sit there and say it's X amount. Now, some of that could be coming from borrowing, and some could be coming from stabilization. But we sit there and say, this is, I mean, and that's kind of what we're trying to get to here, is, right? How much, give or take, right? What's the range of how much is there? And then we have to sit there and say, okay, how much of that can we realistically borrow? What can the town afford in the operating budget afford to borrow? And then the rest of it's got to come from stabilization. So we damn well better make sure that we're saving enough to cover those,
Right,
whatever
yeah,
that gap is. And there's probably a gap plus, because you don't want, you know, it's like that, you can't go negative in that escrow account. So you sit there and say, that's really what we need to get to, is to sit there and say, this is how much we have for capital, that capital needs across, you know, the entire town. It's about X amount per year. The operating budget each year, there's got to be some percentage that you guys are working from that says, you know what, if I have a $50 million budget, I can afford to have this much in my debt, right? That debt. Whatever's left over, I better make sure that I've got it in stabilization. And we have to plan, because I don't know what that number is, right? We've been trying to get to 200 a year in stabilization for capital. Maybe that number needs to be 350, maybe it needs to be 150, I don't know. But
I think we could put a dollar, because I'm, you know, just thinking out loud, you could say a fire truck's got a 25-year shelf life
Yep.
on it. We can't put away so much money for a fire truck, but is there just certain category of items like the air tanks, like, you know, things of that nature that we know are going to come up every 10 years, we're gonna have to replace it. So if we put on, you know, define a category of items too, that we should be accruing for.
So for each of these, should we have What's the shelf life of, how long is it gonna last?
Yeah.
Yeah, something,
Well, to Earl's point, if you don't have something in there for the, the MacBooks every 3 years or every 4 years, we've just kicked it down the road, right? Same thing with the server replacement. If that's not on there every 5 years, if we've acknowledged it once, we've got to keep acknowledging going forward, and that goes for every replacement item.
Yeah, maybe just insert a column here, estimated useful life, right, just your
Yeah.
beginning, so we get a feel, and you could sort it by 3-year, 5-year, 10, or 5-year, 10-year, and longer, or whatever, I don't know, 5, 7, 10.
Yeah, I picture you could have a model created on that to tell us what we need to allocate for, for capital every year, and
Well, you look at the 5-year, right, we're talking about $1 million,
Yeah.
$1.4 million a year, we know our number, right, it's gonna be somewhere to $1 million, $1.4 million
Right.
a year, so how you, like you said, how you gonna pay for that, right?
Yep.
Well, there's the eternal question, right? Because you've got a whole bunch of different stabilization funds.
Yep.
You've got an operating budget to fund, and you've got Prop 2.5 hanging over all of that.
Yep.
So, it's easy to say we should fund all these stabilizations
correct.
and balance the budget and be able to give raises
Yep.
to everyone and,
Yep.
and
Yep.
that's the dance,
Yep.
right? And does one stabilization fund have a priority over another? We have a debt stabilization, we have, a general stabilization, we have all these stabilization funds, none of which are any less important than any others. But when push comes to shove and you say, I have a limited pot of money, which one gets funded first?
What's been the history of stabilization? Have they leveled over the past 5 to 10 years? Are you drawing them down, or have you tried to maintain them over the past 5 years? I don't know that number, but I'm just curious. Do you put 100 in and then you take 300 out, or is it
It
vary?
depends on the stabilization.
Depends on each individual fund and depends on the year probably of the
Yeah.
issue.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no,
And they are different. I do think they have different priorities, because like, for example, road stabilization, right? That one goes up and down
Yeah.
all the time.
okay.
But there are some that impact our bond rating, right? So you need to, only certain ones count towards what they look at. So those are gonna be
Priority one.
higher priority. And we do have guidance from the finance, our finance committee says,
7% or
yeah, here's it's between 5 and 10, we target for 7. But we have some guidelines for those things. But I think, maybe it's just as simple as saying, okay, I got 1.4, right? That I got. Okay, can you guys handle 1.4 in the operating budget? For if we borrow every year moving forward, I think part of the problem that we ran into, and the reason the stabilization accounts, I think, have gone up in the last few years, we had ARPA.
Yeah.
We weren't borrowing money,
you
so,
could put some money,
so
yeah.
we did put some money away. Whether we
Which was
put
good.
enough, I don't know.
Right.
To me, I'm a saver, it's never enough, but I think maybe we just need to look at that and say, what if we do 1.4 million in capital every year? What does that do to can we fund that in our operating budget? That if you're putting that out as debt, is that sustainable? If it's not, then we either gotta find, here's the challenge. If it's not sustainable for us to do it, you're not gonna be able to put into your stabilization anyway,
Right.
because you're just funding it.
But if
that
we
way.
took some of these items out and spread them out over the course of 10 years,
Yeah,
you're not borrowing 1.4 million.
right? So you're deferring some of those, but we might have, sometimes that works, and sometimes we run into other problems, like the pumper truck or whatever.
Correct.
That's the dance that you
But
were
those are
talking
the
about.
ones we can borrow for.
No, it's all borrowing. What I'm saying is, if you have 1.4 in capital, you're borrowing, right? You're either borrowing, right? And that borrowing, whatever your debt service is, for that borrowing, you gotta pay out of your operating budget for that year. It's spread out over a period of time.
Yeah.
But if we sit there and say, if Kat and Colin say, you know what, if we borrow 1.4 million per year for the next 10 years, you're not gonna have enough. We're gonna have to sit there and go, okay, either we pull some stuff off of here, or we find other money. I don't know where that other money comes from, though. Because you can't say, oh, I'm gonna put more money in my stabilization to pay for it.
Right. No, it's right.
The only thing the stabilization helps us with is, and my take on it, it'd be awesome if you could have half of it coming from stabilization and half you do debt on. I think that's pie in the sky. But the only thing the stabilization helps you is I'm collecting interest in the money in stabilization, and when I use it, I'm not paying interest, right?
Yep.
Whereas the debt, I gotta pay the interest. Interest rates are kind of high now, so I don't want to borrow as much, but that's ultimately the thing. I don't know from whether we can do 1.4 million a year for the next 5 years. I guess that's probably the question that you guys are gonna have to answer. Can we do 1.4 million a year for the next 5 years? I don't know.
Right.
Question for us.
But we've got numbers, right? We've got data that says, this is about what we think it's gonna
You
be.
got needs,
Yeah.
it's either find another source of revenue or to cut expenses,
Uh-huh.
right? I mean, or some combination of the two.
That's what it is. Yeah.
And it's where Colin works his magic in the back room.
And that's exactly why we wanted to get
Yeah,
feedback
no,
on the 5-year plan to see is this realistic now we know that this is what we want to include. So at the next meeting, we'll be able to give you an answer if we can afford it or not.
Yeah, and I know some people, scream about grants and trying to get grants and, you're making a deal and you just defer. That's how you pay for some of this stuff, right? You sit there and go, we've been running, 2-3 million a year in grants. That's a big difference.
Yep.
So, I think that we gotta continue to, do that, be creative in ways in which we find that, but I think this gives us a good idea about what 5 years is gonna look like. My guess is it's light on years 4 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
And we do need to include the items that you were talking about, Tony, with the ones that we know, right? That we bought them in the last few years and they've got a 5-year life. Boom, they better be on there somewhere.
They're coming back.
Yep.
But I think that'd be a cool project, is look at the last 5 years, the next 5 years, what has the shelf life, and how do we categorize that and determine how we're going to fund it going forward?
Yep.
Thank you.
Just full of great ideas.
You're. I won't even comment on that, Tony. Thank you. Okay.
So I have everything I need. Thank you.
Kat, going forward, next month, we expect to see Colin sitting in that seat.
Yes, unfortunately, so this will be my last meeting. It was a pleasure working with all of you.
Same.
I really enjoyed my experience. Hey, maybe one day I'll be back.
Yeah.
Best of luck. Best of
Thank
luck.
you.
Sarah.
I
Congratulations.
think, if I'm not mistaken, didn't our last assistant town manager leave to do something and then came back? Huh.
I don't remember who that is, but
Oh.
yeah.
Well, he can stay in that position, but I'm happy to support him in the future in any capacity. I love working for Colin. I love everyone I've worked with so far, being residents, committee members, and staff. This is a very special place, and
Yep.
you do a lot with a little, and a lot of volunteers, and it's amazing. So I'm very grateful. So thank you.
Sad.
Mm,
Sad to see you go,
It is sad.
but we wish you luck.
yes.
Thank you.
And thank you for everything you've done for us over the last few years.
Thank you. Well, I'll be close by, so if you need anything, we'll be grappling with the same issues. A little bit worse, but no, you're in good hands here. Oh, thank you.
Okay. Tri-board meeting coming up?
Yes, February 24th,
Monday.
and
That
that will be at
sounds soon.
6.
That's Monday.
6 p.m.
Okay.
6 PM, the place will be full and rocking.
I can hardly wait. Will we be having I can't imagine with all the things that are going on that we'll be having a deep dive on capital assets, but I know that'll be just one of the items, right?
Yep.
Just perhaps to set the expectation, to talk about the thought process that needs to happen with replacement items, with, capital versus expense, but, yeah, I think we have a full agenda whenever we have a tri-board.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we'll be talking a lot of budget stuff. This is part of it, but I do think that it would be important for this committee to just communicate some of the things that we were talking about,
Yeah,
planning for long-term things. There are some items that we're trying to get into operating, but that has some pain for some departments, and we've got to figure out how we make that happen.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, the good news is that that's most of the agenda, is the tri-board meeting, so.
Okay. Anything else? For the good of the order?
Good.
No? All right, Mr. Aldridge, you're all set?
I'm just lovely.
Then I will look for a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Wow, that was quick.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, that carries 4-0-0. Thank you, everybody, that was a great meeting.